Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the bug type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. Though they might generally be on the lower end of the intelligence scale compared to other types of Pokemon, the bug type is still a potentially dangerous type that most trainers will get a hold of early in their journey and will need to acquaint themselves with quickly if they wish to make the most of it. It may suffer from a lack of serious advantages against a lot of different types of Pokemon, and many of the Pokemon assigned to the type may be fairly weak even in a fully evolved state, but the type is nonetheless great for taking down some of the fiercest of advanced fighters with several advantages that help to put it in a league of its own when used by the strongest Pokemon assigned to it. It might take a while to find a Pokemon of this type that can truly bring serious pain onto the battlefield, but if you're looking to hit the field early with a fully evolved Pokemon, or know how to bring out their ferocity without having to rely on their intelligence, then the bug type can definitely bring the hurt and surprise the opposition if they think that it will be so easy to squash your Pokemon without understanding the raw power these beasts can possess. As one might expect from the name of the type, the bug type is dominantly comprised of insectoids and creatures of similar relations that all possess the same basic attributes that are assigned to the type. However, it is important to note that this type defines a fairly wide variety of creatures despite the fact that they are all technically related, and more importantly, even those that are labeled as bugs are rarely insects of the truest sense. While most of their anatomy might fit that of an insect, most of the time, these creatures are lacking the correct number of legs, among other things, to be considered true members of their assigned group, hence why they are usually referred to as insectoids and not truly insects. Despite this, these creatures are all linked by a primal instinct stronger than that observed in any other type of Pokemon, and they are often able to use this ferocity to strike fear in the hearts of those that face them at their strongest. However, the actual attacks that define this type are a bit odd, as most of them are little more than basic attacks with some modifications. It is the ferocity with which they are executed that helps define them as bug-type attacks, though in some cases, the assignment of the type to an attack may be more due to the results of observed tests against other types classifying them as such. Special attacks of the type tend to focus on using sound and abnormal light energy of unique wavelengths to deal damage, but their classification is also in turn assigned as a result of experiments testing the attributes of the move. The majority of Pokemon assigned to the bug type are related to arthropods like insects and arachnids, as might be expected for the type given its name, but this does not cover everything, as there are a few odd cases that help to illustrate the unique nature of the type. In particular, Pokemon like Shedinja, Shuckle, and the members of the Shelmet family are classified as being of the bug type as a result of their offensive and defensive attributes, despite not being traditional arthropods in any real form. Still though, these creatures are merely the exceptions, as the tough exoskeletons and iconic body forms that define insectoids and their kin dominate the type, and act as the primary source behind most of the defensive attributes of the type. This can unfortunately mean that the physical attributes of the type can be assumed to be the same for all of the Pokemon assigned to it for the most part, and thus makes it easy to pick out their weaknesses and use them against them. Thankfully, the secondary types that many bug types have can help to buffer against this somewhat. Because most of the Pokemon assigned to the bug type have a similar type of body structure, their physical capabilities tend to be quite similar, and the overall move variety in terms of type diversity can be a bit limited. However, even with this limitation, there is a great variety of moves accessible to bug-type Pokemon linked to their unique body plans and secondary type assignment, so it is rare to see many bug types with similar movesets unless they possess a similar body plan complementing the comparison. In other words, the diversity in the details of their forms lends them access to a wide variety of differing moves that help to complement their unique powers and attributes, making the type surprisingly versatile in that regard. This is equally the case when it comes to learning new moves via TM, HM, or Move Tutor, as these differing body plans lend themselves to a varied degree of versatility via artificial assistance, helping to make these creatures more dangerous than they might naturally be on their own. In terms of the stat averages for the bug type, the type shows below average performance in all 6 main stats, and is thus statistically one of the less useful types. But this is primarily due to the fact that many bug-type Pokemon families are not exactly built to last, with those that evolve at a young age being particularly weak and vulnerable, even in a fully evolved state. In particular, the type seems to lack much in the way of HP and special attack, which makes sense as a lot of bug types prefer to rely on their physical bodies to attack, and, as mentioned before, they are not biologically designed to live for very long, and thus suffer from low stamina as a result. Despite this, the type does excel in attack and defense. The former is the aforementioned result of bug types tending to prefer to rely on their physical bodies to attack and deal damage against other Pokemon, while the higher base defense stat is a consequence of not only their sturdy exoskeletons, but also the few bug-type Pokemon that actually possess superb physical defenses as a tool to use against predatory bird Pokemon, among other creatures. The bug type as a whole might be the weakest of all known types statistically, but the sheer ferocity that these creatures display can make them a formidable force to have to go against, especially if you or your Pokemon have an inherent fear of insects and their relatives to any degree. Currently, there are 77 recognized types of bug-type Pokemon, 18 of them being pure bug types, and the remaining 59 being dual types. Additionally, 54 of the dual types are primary bug types, while the remaining 5 are secondary bug types. They are broken down into the following categories. Insectoids. These creatures are all unified by the fact that they are classified as insectoids, and follow the basic body plan of a true insect for the most part, with 3 distinct body segments and usually close to, if not having exactly 6 legs. This last feature is not always present in many of these creatures, despite most other features of the physical form matching, hence why these creatures are referred to as insectoids and not true insects. The mode of life that these creatures lead can vary tremendously from one family to another, as while some might live in colonies, others, like the members of the Scyther family, Pinsir and Heracross, are solitary beasts that spend much of their life on their own. In addition, the overall powers of these creatures can vary greatly, as while some use toxic powders and other status-inflicting moves as their primary means of defense, others are more physically defensive in nature, while others still are offensively minded and have access to devastating strength that can leave other Pokemon cowering in fear. Regardless, these creatures tend to live lives that are not that different from their insect relatives, going through similar life cycles and in turn only truly being differentiated from them at a core level by their combat abilities and excessive size. Cocoons. These creatures are technically still considered to be insectoids in their own right, but they are classified as something completely different because they exist in an abnormal state where the actual organism inside of them is effectively liquefying and being restructured from a larval state into an adult form, with the cocoon acting as a transitionary evolutionary stage. These cocoon organisms tend to stay as still as they possibly can for the sake of their insides, for the developing organism inside of them is often quite delicate and cannot be disturbed too heavily, as it could damage them and result in a malformed adult unfit for survival in the wild. Thankfully, this stage of evolution is usually a short one, with Pokemon that evolve into these creatures usually emerging from their cocoon a day or two after entering it, and their cocoons often have fortified defenses to allow them to take some damage without breaking and revealing the vulnerable life form inside. The only exceptions to this are Swadloon, which are stuck in their cocoon stage due to a state of semi-permanent depression that only happiness can help them evolve past, while Whirlipede take a long time to evolve because they are almost constantly moving and save little energy for the developing adult inside of them. Gastropods. While the members of the Shelmet family are technically not as closely related to other Pokemon assigned to the bug type as they are more traditional water types, their physical forms tend to harness power and ferocity that is associated with the bug type, hence their assignment as such. This is also helped by the fact that they are somewhat more land-dwelling than water-dwelling in their habitats of choice, preferring to live in places like marshes where there's at least some solid ground, and the only water-type attack they get as Excelgor is Water Shuriken, compared to the many bug-type moves that they otherwise naturally learn and specialize in. Parasitic mushrooms. The members of the Paras family are technically considered to be true insects as cicada nymphs, but they are classified separately from other bug types because the parasitic mushrooms that grow on their backs eventually become the dominating organism in their relationship, resulting in them inheriting offenses and techniques from both sides of the relationship. By the time they reach their adult form, these beasts are reduced to relatively mindless husks, with the mushroom on their backs taking full control. While this makes them incredibly weak to extreme heat, at the same time, it allows them to make the most of their physical power to deliver fierce attacks in close quarters, while the mushroom uses its toxic spores to strike from afar. Arachnid morphs. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are closely related to spiders and scorpions, but lack the correct number of limbs to make them true arachnids. Regardless, these beasts exhibit the same overall abilities as insectoid bug types and are thus classified as bug types themselves, with their exoskeletons performing the same as those possessed by insectoid bug types would, and their attacks exhibiting similar characteristics. The major exceptions come in the form of moves like spiderweb and electroweb that are normally only learned naturally by these creatures, while Scorupi mainly rely on their powerful tail stinger and claws to attack. Crustaceans. These creatures follow the same logic used in assigning the members of the shellmet family as bug types in regards to the relative degree of time they spend on land versus the water. In this case, these creatures are primarily land-dwelling, even though they have the ability to live in the water to a limited degree. This is heavily reinforced in the case of the Dwebble family, which are actually vulnerable to water-type assaults as a result of the stone shells they use as both homes and for defense, and their complete inability to learn any water-type attacks. The members of the Wimpod family, on the other hand, are still partial water types and exhibit attributes of both types quite readily, with Golisopod in particular being able to deal devastating damage with their potent liquidation attack. Cambrian organisms. The members of the Anorith family are unique among bug types for not being insectoids or arachnid morphs, instead being part of a separate lineage of arthropods altogether that went extinct millions of years ago. Brought back to the present through their remains, known as claw fossils, these creatures originated from the Cambrian period and are believed to be part of the genus Anomalocaris. While they primarily dwell in the water as juveniles, these creatures become land dwellers as well when Anorith evolve into Armaldo, and only ever return to the water to hunt, the water being the only place where they can hunt silently relative to their massive plodding frames on land. While they do gain access to both bug and water-type moves naturally, the fact that they are relatively unclassifiable outside of their partial rock-type assignment has forced their classification to come down to their defensive attributes, which push them closer to being bug types and are thus assigned as such. Shed Shell. This special category is reserved for Shedinja, a creature generated when the discarded shell of a newly evolved ninjask is possessed by a wandering spirit and given new life, going beyond being a cocoon and existing as a supernatural entity. This form of existence limits these creatures severely in terms of their defense, as the brittle shell will readily crumble upon the slightest of contact, but their devastating Wonder Guard ability can help to keep them protected against many types of direct defense, potentially making them untouchable monsters under the right circumstances. Mold. This special category is reserved for Shuckle, which are extremely unique among bug-type Pokémon for the simple fact that they are not related remotely to anything else assigned to the bug type, actually existing as sentient mold. It is unknown how these beasts were originally able to gain the level of sentience they possess, let alone take on a stable body form that is relatively mobile. While their sturdy shell is able to protect them against the fiercest of attacks, their actual body is extremely soft and vulnerable and unable to do much in the way of noticeable damage. And because their bodies react to damage the same way a traditional bug type would, in combination with their partial rock type assignment, they are assigned as such. Cyborg. This special category is reserved for Genesect, which, although technically considered to be fossil Pokemon just like the members of the Anorith family, are classified separately as a result of the permanent modifications that have been made to their bodies during their resurrection and the subsequent experimentation conducted on them. With their bodies hidden under a thick layer of titanium alloy armor as both a form of protection and a direct source of power, coupled with the numerous microchips inserted into their brains and the experimental photon cannons strapped to their backs, these beasts are incredibly dangerous, with brutal insect instincts combined with the firepower of a war machine, and are without a doubt the most powerful bug-type Pokemon known to exist. They might be incredibly rare to come across, but for the sake of all other life, that is probably a good thing, given that they are more likely to destroy their opponents than they are to simply beat them in a fight. Ultra Beasts. This special category is reserved for Buzzwole and Pheromosa, two of the extra universal entities known as the Ultra Beasts. Although their powers and forms might help to cement them as entities from a world far beyond our own, both of these creatures nonetheless possess forms that are very much in line with those possessed by more traditional insectoid Pokemon in terms of their physiology and the types of damage their exoskeletons take against other types of attack. And their movesets and attack patterns follow that of a traditional bug type as well, making their assignment as such fairly easy to understand. Even so, while they do still display mannerisms similar to those seen in other bug-type Pokemon, they are noticeably more intelligent in their actions, and can thus be more reasonable to handle if one is ever lucky enough to obtain one of them for their own personal use. In looking at the bug type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the bug type has 3 advantages, 7 disadvantages, and no negative immunities. The type is at an advantage against the grass type because many insectoids and their relatives have a dominating overview of plants, sometimes feeding on them as their primary source of nutrition. As such, the biological attributes that define the bug type's damaging attacks are designed to be able to cut through and devour plant-based life forms with ease, in turn making plant-based Pokemon highly vulnerable to their assaults. The type is at an advantage against the psychic type because, while not all trainers manage to make the connection so readily, many psychic types can think and act much like humans, and in turn share with us the potential to possess psychological fears. In particular, these creatures tend to have an overbearing fear of lesser life forms that are of lower intelligence but are greater in number and are ferocious in their mannerisms, with bug types being a primary exhibitor of these qualities. This makes sense, as the seemingly mindless actions of individuals but the powerful collective intelligence and strength of a swarm can be terrifying to just about anyone, and in the case of the psychic type, it seems that just about anything is capable of triggering a fearful episode when it comes from the bug type, even if the Pokemon using a bug type attack is not of that type. The type is at an advantage against the dark type, not only because there is a shared fear of the type as seen with the psychic type, though it is more of a primal fear than an intellectual one in this case, but more so because the attributes of the bug type and the brains of those that possess it seem to show a resistance to the effects of anti-positive energy, enabling them to strike more fiercely at these creatures than normal and use their attributes to halt the flow of anti-positive energy in the body of a dark type target, dealing severe damage in the process. The type is at a disadvantage against the flying type because there's often an existing predatory relationship between these creatures and bug types that leaves flying types with a natural resistance against the effects of their attacks. Not just physically, but psychologically as well, as most bug types are afraid to use their natural assets to attack when they know they are putting themselves in the way of a potential predator. The type is at a disadvantage against the fighting type, not only because the tough, rugged bodies of fighting types are capable of resisting the fierce attacks of bug types, but, more importantly, because they have no fear of bug types and are thus mentally resilient against their attacks, powering through them and shrugging them off as if they were nothing in some cases. The type is at a disadvantage against the poison type primarily because, since many bug types are associated with poison of some form or another, whether it be true poison or some other caustic substance, while they are able to tolerate toxins to an incredible degree, their internal toxins have a tendency to help rejuvenate any poison type that they come across, and in general are not able to penetrate as easily as other types through their abnormal body forms for reasons that are still being studied, granting the poison type a natural resistance against their strikes. The type is at a disadvantage against the fire type for both physical and psychological reasons. Psychologically, these creatures understand that they are highly vulnerable to extreme heat, as the exoskeletons and bodies in general of bug types tend to burn at temperatures above 170 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And since most fire-type attacks burn at higher temperatures, they fear attacking with their full power, lest they get singed and burned to a crisp in retaliation. On that same note, physically, extreme heat and flames tend to have the effect of dissipating the energy and sound used in bug-type special attacks, in turn reducing the damage that they are capable of dealing. The type is at a disadvantage against the ghost type because bug-type moves tend to not have much of an effect against creatures that lack the general physical attributes that define a living creature, with the users of the move often having a hard time defining the target they are facing and in turn being unable to put their full power behind their strikes, which can often be the result of their general lack of intelligence in some cases. Special attacks are affected similarly, with the special attributes of the moves used to deal damage often being readily dispersed by the spiritual energy exuded by ghost types. The type is at a disadvantage against the steel type because, while rocky armor might not have the elemental properties needed to repel the attacks of bug types and the special attacks they are capable of using, metallic armor has physical and energy reflecting properties that compensate for the uniqueness of the bug type's attributes and in turn grants it a damage buffer against said assaults. Lastly, the type is at a disadvantage against the fairy type because it seems that the fairy force energy exuded by fairy types has the abnormal effect of confusing and repelling bug types for reasons that are still unclear. As a result, these creatures are unable to attack fairy types readily in a fight, and their special attacks are dissipated partially in turn by this aura of fairy force energy. Defensively speaking, the bug type has 3 resistances, 3 weaknesses, and no immunities. The type is resistant against the fighting type because, while insect exoskeletons and the physical bodies of bug types in general may be easily ripped apart by the cutting and piercing attacks of flying types, they can work as excellent shock absorbers against the impulse-directed assaults of fighting-type Pokémon. So when they are struck by a fighting-type attack, the energy of the blow is imparted over a wider part of their body, reducing the overall impact of the blow on any one part of them and in turn the damage dealt. The type is resistant against the grass type because the dominating presence that bug types tend to have over plant life makes grass types in turn less likely to want to attack these creatures at full force for fear of their own safety, in turn reducing the damage that they can deal to them with their attacks. The type is resistant against the ground type because there seems to be an inherent link between the earth and these creatures, possibly due to the land-dwelling nature of many bug types, using the earth as both a home and a source of nutrition in some cases. This has rendered them resistant against seismic attacks and moves in general that involve the earth in some way, showing a level of dominance that is exhibited by few other types. The type is weak against the flying type because the exoskeletons of bug-type Pokémon, though fairly sturdy, are vulnerable to the concussive force of direct attacks from flying types or powerful gusts of wind and other wind-based attacks. This makes sense biologically, as many flying-type Pokémon have developed their offensive flying-type attributes in part to bypass the exoskeletons of these creatures in order to more readily get at their soft, edible insides. The type is weak against the fire type because of the vulnerability to burning these creatures exhibit at temperatures in excess of 170 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and with most fire-type attacks being delivered at temperatures far in excess of this, it is therefore not surprising that they possess an inherent weakness to fire-type attacks. Lastly, the type is weak against the rock type because, much like the flying type, the bodies of these creatures must remain fairly light in order for them to move around at decent speeds, and maintain flight in the case of those that can fly, and their bodies in general are not built to be able to handle extreme blunt force trauma. Even a small stone can potentially deal noticeable damage to these creatures, leaving many bug types vulnerable to the crushing power of rock type attacks, even more so if they are partial flying types and have their wings crushed in the process, grounding them and leaving them vulnerable to further assaults without a way to defend themselves. As far as using the bug type in battle goes, the bug type can often be both a boon for novice trainers and a curse as they become more experienced because of the way the type's constituents live and evolve. On one hand, it is helpful that a lot of bug type families that trainers generally get early access to evolve at a fairly young age, allowing trainers to have a fully evolved Pokémon on their team with relatively little effort. However, this power is only useful for a short while, as bug-type Pokémon that evolve so early also tend to be among the weakest of fully evolved Pokémon, and cannot offer much in the way of powerful offense compared to other fully evolved Pokémon. In addition, while the varied body forms of Bug-type Pokémon allow them to utilize a wide variety of moves, they are generally limited in the actual types they can gain access to naturally, with Normal, Bug, Poison, and Flying being the most common types of moves seen, with little spaced in between that of serious note outside of those granted by other partial types. This is compounded by the limited intelligence displayed by many Bug types, as well as their limited lifespans, often living shorter lives than nearly any other Pokémon, though Pokémon like the members of the Scyther and Larvesta families are among the few that contradict this and the other mentioned issues. While the sounds and toxins used by many of these creatures to deter attack can make them a bit of a pain, the Bug type still has its place on the right team for its usefulness against powerful Psychic and Dark type Pokémon that otherwise have very few natural weaknesses. As such, while the type may have a reputation for being inherently weak and inferior to other types on the battlefield, the Bug type and those assigned to it can definitely show a powerful ferocity that goes beyond what similar Pokémon are capable of, and can make a significant impact in battle as long as they are played carefully and not put into the direct line of fire until it can be assessed that their specialized offenses will prove to be incredibly effective against whatever opposition they face. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokémon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description. With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.